It's really interesting because most entertainment businesses, like television, music, film, books, like you engage with a thing, you finish it, and then you move on to the next one. And that
Yeah.
paradigm has like informed a tremendous amount of sort of video game thinking, from product strategy to project management. And it's in some ways it's good, like out the old, what's new. And the game industry has slowly drifted back towards traditional market dynamics where you have bigger, more establishing players that aren't sort of letting go anymore. And the way you compete in an area where there's big established players that aren't letting go is closer to how Coke competes with Pepsi as opposed to how Wicked competes as a film. So it's like, depending on sort of what genre you're competing in, it might fundamentally change how much thought you put into how you compete and sort of how do you prove yourself you're ready to compete, and sort of thinking about what players actually want and what makes them happy. Like, I think, I don't think that gets in the way of sort of it being an art form and being creative. It's just different because suddenly you're not dealing with players that are looking for what's next. You're looking for players that are actually pretty happy with sort of their gaming hobby and their ecosystem, and they aren't
Yeah.
necessarily looking for the new thing. And if it's new, the likelihood that they check you out and go back to their favorite thing, that you're sort of they're a tourist in your game, but they're sort of an enthusiast in their game, like that's much more serious. And I think that used to be on the fringes, and at some point, like you were saying, there was a tipping point where sort of the broader video game medium started drifting in that direction. And I think a lot of the publishers and devs are scrambling to figure out sort of what to do and how to sort of adjust. And I think
Yeah.
it's, like we're seeing it in front of us. And in a lot of ways, we assumed that the next big hobby game had similar economics to the last big hobby game. And some publishers, ran into a wall realizing like, no, those players weren't looking for the next big hobby game. They're still playing the last one, man. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, now what is that? Hold on a second. We have to think about this. It's like, yeah, man. I don't know either, but we do need to think about this.
Yeah. A couple of things came to mind. One is uh, chess. Chess is this game that's I don't actually know the full history of it, but it's a very old game. And you can imagine how many games that are in many ways similar to chess were probably attempted over the thousands of years that humans have been making games, tens of thousands of years that we've been making games, and trying to like do this. And chess survived. And it's like, why did chess survive? Because it did. Because it was good. Because it engaged people. Because whatever it was. And I think I was reading about it, and it was like the last rule change that happened around some particular sequence of moves. I'm not a chess guy, but it was there. Since then it's just been this is the game, right? And it's played around the world. It's a competitive sport. Why did it survive? Why did everything else not? And there's stuff like Go and checkers and other games that still endure, and you get some really hilarious ones from a game design perspective, like tic tac toe and stuff like that are just so simple. They just get pushed down generation to generation without anybody even realizing what's happening. But
I want to plus
there's
one that
this
real
like
quick.
there's this
Yeah.
depth. Yeah,
Yeah. Like cricket is massive in India. And like,
yeah,
why not in America? Rugby in South Africa. And you're like, oh, that's because of history and culture. And it's like, yeah, but it's still weird that like, what's a beloved national sport in one area is culturally irrelevant on another. And it's the same thing with like music genres. Like what makes a music genre more
yeah,
evergreen versus not? And it's just when these things are sticky and they're established and you're like, hey, Gen Z's into basketball but less into baseball, and you're trying to understand why. And it's like, do we need to change baseball to make it more appealing to Gen? Like, those questions are fundamentally different than the traditional questions we've had with games because we haven't had to wrestle with the fact
yes,
that these things have legs and permanence and cultural significance in ways that are really hard to understand, but totally
yep.
change how smart it is or is not to spend on a video game. Like if you're trying to, like if you're trying to build like a hobby game and you're like, well, are we the next World of Warcraft or not? That is a much harder conversation than the film equivalent of sort of, are we the next big action adventure game for 2020, whatever? that sort of, the strategy and the moving parts are much more complicated because you're sort of operating in a different space. But we call both these things video games, and that's, I think, what makes it easy to sort of make the mistake of assuming like trying to make a great one of these is similar to trying to make a great one of these other ones. Like they're different
Well,
creatures.
the thing that just struck me again, coming back to other mediums, is hey, game development, you have to see yourself from a virality perspective more like tag and capture the flag played on like a field with a bunch of kids running around than like Dune 2.
Yeah.
Like you are in some way, yes, in some ways you're like Dune 2, but in a lot of ways you're like tag.
Depending on your
Because
genre, some genres in the middle.
depending on your genre,
some
yes,
of them,
exactly.
like,
And interestingly, it pushes something that I think. So let's say 15 years. I mean, you can go back to again Counter-Strike, but let's say World of Warcraft 20 years ago launches, and there were MMOs before that, but that really just put the flag on as like, okay, this thing is running and it's running for a long time. And it took a while, right? You had League of Legends come out 2009, but it took like a while before people kind of caught up in terms of their development efforts of what does it mean to make a live service product, because you didn't have as many that were trying to do that. We could be a multi-decade or multi-generational product. And then when they did, they were like, wait a minute, could I spend $100 million and make $1 billion a year? Well, that seems like a good deal. And so you had this like jump in investment, and suddenly everybody was trying to make a live service game. And the interesting thing is when you look at a lot of the big hits over the last few years, they've been either open world RPGs or, like Baldur's Gate, like stuff where you play it, you enjoy it, you go through the experience. Like I have no doubt, Witcher 4 is going to be a good game. I'm looking like that's one I'm excited about. It's going to be solid. Like, and yet it's not going to probably, I mean, I don't know if what they actually made.
It's unlikely it turns into an entire hobby ecosystem.
Exactly. You're going to play it. You're going to love it. You're going to enjoy it. And then you're going to move on.
Yeah.
And they designed it that way. They built it that way. And you can go back and play it again. And like, if you really like it, like I played Baldur's Gate 3 a couple of times through and I enjoyed each run. But I didn't like at this point, it might be a couple years before I go back in, unless if my friend group is all like, let's do another BG3 run. Maybe I'll hop in. But it's this thing of, I feel like those games actually occupy the space you're talking about because they do, like you said, based on genre, they sit in that space of being, I don't need to be an evergreen product. I can just be the game that you are the tourist in. And then you can go back and live in World of Tanks if you want to.
Yeah, it's just another album that people can enjoy and go through